what is it meant by Pauline Christianity? I know we kind of know because of the Apostle Paul, but in a nutshell, is it that people would rather choose the words of Paul over the words of Jesus, or what does that mean exactly?
All right. So Paul was, without a question, the most important convert to Christianity. In fact, if he hadn't converted to Christianity, Christianity would have never become the religion that it became. How did Christianity start as a fledgling group in Jerusalem and became? How did it move to the center of the empire, the city of Rome? How did that happen? It was very much because of Paul. And Paul, one point about Paul is he wrote a very significant part of the Christian Bible. Many people don't realize that of the 27 books in the Christian Bible, 13 of them are attributed to Paul, and actually 14 are, because many Christians insist that the book of Hebrews was written by Paul. That means, according to traditional Christian thought, the majority of the books in the Christian Bible are attributed to Paul. One other point about it is that of the 27 books of the New Testament, only 8 books are not written, are attributed properly, because of those 13 books, they really weren't all written by Paul. 7 are certainly were. So Paul is the most important, most influential person in the Christian movement. But one other point should be made, and that is, if you read the letters of Paul, Paul had far more enemies than friends, and his enemies were not Jews who didn't believe in Jesus. That's, I think, what most people would think. But if you read his letters, he's fighting with other people who believed in Jesus, and he was saying, and they were accusing him of being a liar, a fraud, a Johnny-come-lately who has, I mean, Paul never met Jesus, so they're going, you don't know what you're talking about. You're teaching something that is, and that's why Paul will reiterate over and over again that he's a true apostle. He received his message directly from Jesus. That's very weak. You won't see nobody else, no other writer in the New Testament writes that way. Now, you have the letters of Peter, but those are falsely attributed. There's almost no question. There's certainly no question Second Peter wasn't written by Peter. There's really no, in my mind, there's no question that First Peter wasn't written by Peter, and so on. But Paul has a very important message, and the message is that the Torah is done with, and and instead, what is that Jesus replaces the law of Moses. You'll find this in Colossians 2:13 through 15. He forgave all of our sins, and he canceled the written Torah, the written commandments. What? That was against us. Those commandments are against us and stand opposed to us. He took it away, those commandments, those ordinances, and he nailed them to the cross. So this is a very important message of Paul, and that is that the Torah, the commandments of God, are done with. It means ritual law, not moral law. And it is replaced with Jesus. Jesus has fulfilled the law for us, and you don't, I was going to say you don't need to keep the law, but you must understand, I'm going to make another point here. To Paul, he insisted that keeping the law was worse than irrelevant. It was an admission. If you kept the law of Moses, it was an admission that Jesus died. Jesus' death was completely insufficient for salvation. And the church, by adopting Paul wins out in this fight against his many enemies. Paul wins. Why? We're not going to go into right now. But the key point is this. For Paul, I mean, this is Galatians 5 and 6. If you are circumcised, that means if you circumcise for ritual, Christ will avail you nothing. To Paul, keeping the law was not just not relevant. It meant that you're depending on the law for your salvation. And that's misunderstood by many Christians. And but that is not, the church fathers and reformers were right. When I say right, meaning they were reading Paul correctly. This is not some rabbi or anti-missionary sort of character, making a caricature of Paul, portraying him in a way that is, this is the way all the church fathers and all the reformers, These are very bright people. These were not idiots. Augustine was not stupid. Origen was a genius. Luther was brilliant. Bucer was brilliant. Calvin was Spurgeon. They all understood it because this is the plain natural reading of Paul. And Paul, when Paul wrote his letters, this is very important, he made it very clear that he severed any ties to his Jewish faith. Now, he does say in 1 Corinthians 9, 20 and 21 that he will become as a Jew to the Jews. You'll see that in Romans 10 and 11. And to those who are not in the law, he'll become as I can become all things to all men. So Paul is completely a chameleon in the way he will preach. But then we see very clearly he could become a Jew to the Jews. So what Paul is saying very clearly, and he says in fact in 3:8, Romans 3:8, he says there that in fact that in his own words, everything else, meaning the law of Moses, is as worthless, this is the words, is worthless as excrement. And that's the word in Greek. It's interesting, we talked about this before, the King James Bible will change that to garbage or refuse, but it really says excrement there. That's what the language Paul used. So Paul, that's Pauline Christianity. The law is a curse, and it's just to show us the way to the cross. That means the purpose of the law is to point our eyes to Golgotha, to Calvary, and not to Sinai.
Now, just to clarify something, what Rabbi Singer is addressing is the Christian view of the New Testament. There is an alternate view that is considered in the Messianic field, and I know this all too well because I went from Christianity to Messianic Judaism, and they view things and they understand Paul's writings differently. This is not what he's addressing. He's addressing the Christian view of this topic. Okay, so there's the reason why Messianic Judaism exists is because there are certain sects of Christianity which basically is the same thing. They still believe in a man demigod. So they're technically the same thing, except Messianic Jews tend to say that Paul taught to keep the Torah. That's not what we're addressing here. It's
let me comment on that. I
Yes,
want to just comment on that quickly.
The Messianic movement is not monolithic. The Messianic movement, all Messianic congregations have things in common. They believe in the central tenets of Christianity, and they adopt Christian icons, liturgy, and so on for the purpose of evangelism. The vast majority of Messianic congregations, this is just a technique. And this is what people find out. They're in a Messianic congregation, they first think, oh, this is great. I can have Jesus, but now he's Yeshua. I can have the Judaism, which I crave, but I don't have to give up Jesus. Perfect. Okay? And then people go, wait, this is the same. And there really is, for the most part, there is no difference. For 90% of Messianic congregations, there's absolutely no difference between what a Messianic congregation believes and what a Southern Baptist or an Assemblies of God church right down the block believes, except the rabbinic traditions they've adopted in order to inculcate it, in order to make it appear Jewish. Now, what happened subsequent to the creation of the Messianic movement, let's just say in the early 70s, as we know it today, there was a transformation. There was some people going, well, maybe you really should keep the law. You see, so it started off as a method, a technique. It started off nefarious, but then there were people who got involved in it, mostly non-Jews, said, wait, we really should be keeping the law. So what happened is that in those groups, Jews often are condemned in the Messianic movement. And I'm not going to say they're now aberrant, but it's growing in the Messianic movement. But that's something that happened later where Messianics said, well, maybe we should be keeping the law. And Paul didn't, but they're not reading it naturally. That means what they're doing is they're looking at some texts, ignoring others. The church fathers and reformers, even though they hate my guts, they were right. They were reading Paul correctly.